To all those people watching, I'd like to remind everyone that this video is not made for kids. It's for older fans and adults. Enjoy the fucking video!
Although all of the railways on the island of Sodor still run steam engines, the world has pretty much changed around them since their younger days. One of the things they see nowadays is their passengers holding on to their phones, tablets and laptops whenever they're on their journeys, and sometimes they take photos, videos or doing something for work. Scar Lowy though didn't see what's important about it and wished that the passengers would pay attention to what's around them instead of looking at their screens. "I understand the world needs to change," he said in the shed one evening, "but sometimes I feel passengers today are just ignoring us and staring at their screen things." "They are important to them, Scar Lowy," replied a voice. "Coal and water are important to us, Amanda," replied Scar Lowy, "but I don't see what's so special about all these gizmos and gadgets, and honestly I don't think I want to know." Amanda chuckled. "One day you'll understand. I remember you always calling my mother an old fusspod, but I think I know who the real fusspod is." Scar Lowy smiled. Amanda is one of the daughters of Nancy. She works on the railway as a driver by day, and by night she polishes them just like what her mother used to do before moving to Douglas on the Isle of Man with her husband. Amanda's children had often volunteered on the railway during the summer to help out with their mother until they moved to live on the island of Sodor from the Isle of Man. They were so fond of the railway that it had become almost like a family tradition. Her sister Laura helps out too with her husband and children, but she works at the local real estate selling homes to many people who want to live around the area. One day they had some exciting news for the engines. "Our mother is coming to visit this week from the Isle of Man, and she'll be helping us on the railway with our dad as well." The engines all whistled and cheered. They loved it when Nancy came to visit with her husband Jeremy. Scar Lowy was the most excited of all. He remembered Nancy ever since she first worked on the railway, polishing him and the other engines. They would often tease and banter with each other, and Scar Lowy would tell her stories of these early days. They were so fond of each other over the years that when Nancy got married to Jeremy, who had also worked on the railway as a ticket collector, he was given the honour of pulling her wedding train to the church at Lakeside. After they got married, they decided to create a life at Douglas on the Isle of Man. Scar Lowy was sad, but was glad that she came to visit, and Scar Lowy often looked forward to their visit every summer. But like the world around them, things change. Hello everybody, welcome to the island of Sodor. Gordon pulled in with his local train, and out stepped the train amongst the throng of the other passengers was Nancy and her husband Jeremy. "Mum! Mum!" called out the daughters. "Laura! Amanda!" called out Nancy and her husband. "Hi, Grandma," replied the children. "Well, if it isn't Henry, Arthur, Hazel and Rose." "Good golly, you're growing up very well," replied Nancy fondly. "Your mothers have been treating you well." Laura and Amanda helped them with their bags and they made their way to the cars. After picking up their luggage, they came to the railway. The engines who were there all gave her a special peep from their whistles as a way of welcoming her and her husband back to Sodor. "Very nice to meet you too," they said. She then sighed and frowned. "Is something the matter, Nancy?" asked Scar Lowy. "Oh, nothing, Scar Lowy, I'm fine. Just tired from the trip. I'll see you all later." And so she turned and walked away to the car with her family. "Do you think something is wrong?" asked Scar Lowy worriedly. "I don't know, Scar Lowy," replied Hugh sadly, "but I think she is just tired. She might be a lot better when we see her tomorrow. The next day, Nancy and her husband came to the sheds to polish Skarloey and the other engines. "Feeling better, are you, Nancy?" he asked. "Oh, yes I am, Skarloey," replied Nancy brightly. "That's good, because it wasn't like you yesterday when you left in such a hurry." "I'm sorry for that, Skarloey. I didn't mean any offense." "None taken," replied Skarloey happily. "It's good to see you being happy." Skarloey looked towards the station and saw some of the passengers with their gadgets while waiting for their train on the big railway. "I don't see the point of those gadgets, gizmos, hoodsits or whatsits or whatever they're called." Nancy and her husband looked at the things that Skarloey was referring to, and they chuckled. "I quite understand, Skarloey, but Jeremy and I have those things too." "You do?" said Skarloey. "Oh yes," replied Nancy. "They are important to us." "What's so important about them?" "They're just a nuisance," replied Skarloey. "Well, of course you'll say that since you're an engine, but maybe one day you'll understand their importance." "That's what Amanda told me the other day, and told me that I was a real fusspot." Nancy and her husband chuckled, and so did Skarloey. After being polished, he puffed away to collect his first train for the day. "Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Jeremy," he whistled. The old couple looked towards the old engine as he puffed away. "We'll tell him tonight." That night, as Skarloey came to the sheds, he saw Nancy and her husband standing towards the engines with their family. "Is there anything the matter, Nancy?" asked Skarloey. "Yes," she replied. "We wanted to tell you all that this will be our last trip to the island of Sodor." The engines gasped. "Why?" they asked. "Well, Nancy and I are getting on in years, and travelling around has become a bit of a difficulty to us. We're not as spritzy like we used to be." "Is that why you left early yesterday, Nancy?" asked Skarloey. "Yes, I wasn't feeling up to telling all of you when we arrived. I didn't want to upset you all since you were looking forward to seeing us." The Thing Controller heard the news when he came towards the shed, and while he was sad by the outcome, he smiled and said, "And we are very pleased that you'll be a part of the railway family for many years, Nancy, as well as your husband, and we are proud that our railway is home to your family tradition. We'll hold a special farewell party for you and Jeremy on your last day." All the engines agreed. But Skarloey just looked down sadly at his buffers. Nancy and Jeremy had polished him, but the old engine was very quiet, and while he was pulling his trains, they were behind schedule. Everyone was cross and began to tell the Thing Controller what a bad railway it was. Skarloey was moved to the sheds while his crew were looking him all over to see if something was loose or damaged, but they couldn't find anything wrong.
Amanda's children, Henry and Arthur, knew what the real cause was, and then told their grandparents.
Nancy knew that Skarloey would take the news to heart since they knew each other very well. "Why don't you move back to Sodor then?" replied Henry. "It would be lovely," sighed Nancy sadly, "but your grandfather and I have made a life back in Douglas, and it would be hard for us to settle back here since we don't know many people unlike home." Then Arthur had an idea. The final day of Nancy and Jeremy's visit had arrived, and the Thing Controller had gathered all his engines and staff for the party. Everyone joked, sang, and shared their favourite memory they had of one of their visits. Skarloey had put on a brave face for Nancy and her husband, but welled up in tears in the end when they boarded Gordon's train. "Goodbye, Nancy. Goodbye, Jeremy," whistled the engines. "Thanks for the memories." And they carried on whistling until Gordon was out of sight. The next morning, Nancy and Jeremy's daughters, Laura's husband Richard, and their children all came to the shed to see Skarloey. "Skarloey, we got a surprise for you," said Amanda. Richard showed him a box. Skarloey knew what it was. "Why would you give me this?" he asked, looking confused. "I don't have hands, I'll crush it." Everyone laughed, and after setting it all up, Arthur clicked on a blue picture saying the words Zoom. And to Skarloey's surprise, there was Nancy and Jeremy on the other end smiling towards him and said, "Hello, Skarloey." Skarloey smiled. There was Nancy and her husband talking to him. He was delighted. "This was Arthur's idea," replied Henry, his younger brother. "Now he can talk with Grandma and Grandad like us." "Thank you very much," peeped Skarloey happily. And every week the old engine and Nancy talked with each other whenever they had the time.